All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us and watching this debate. And it's not really a debate, it's going to be more of a discussion. I'm Billy Bob, and I have with me a Facebook friend who I've been engaging with extensively on our, political debate group. So he calls himself the Elementalist. He goes by that name. And so yeah, we've been having an enjoyable discussion, comparing and contrasting ideas over a couple weeks time. And, for people that like to disagree, like myself, it's been a lot of fun, but it's kind of laborious too, and then you get at an impasse and it's like, man, I don't want to have to type out a whole nother several paragraphs. So I invited the Alimentalist to join me in a discussion, and we're looking forward to discussing, the same topics that we've been going over for the past couple weeks. But I wanted to start out just by kind of, putting in my own words where I understand the Alimentalist to be coming from. And so, both him and I, we claim Marxists. We claim to be Marxists, and we want to embrace the mantle of Marxism. So I understand that he disagrees with my embrace of Marxism, right? And he says that my understanding of Marxism is, not not correct, and that I think one of the main issues of contention is the one of actual existing socialism. So whereas a Marxist-Leninist like myself thinks that Lenin was a Marxist and like Mao was a Marxist, and they did their best to achieve a successful revolution and then to implement socialism and work towards communism. The Alimentalist here, I should probably maybe shorten that. It's tough to roll off the tongue. But you kind of reject that idea, and that you say that Marx had something totally different in mind, and that these supposed actual existing socialist societies have nothing to do with Marxist, and that Marx would have rejected them. So I mean, that in itself is a big topic for discussion. I don't know if it's the main one, but I mean, as I'm just extemporaneously describing our differences, I obviously that's the first and most biggest one that comes to mind. So do you want to maybe add to that, sir?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Elementalist. So yeah, me and Billy Bob have been talking on our Facebook group, and um, it's interesting to finally have some dialect that doesn't consist of me being called Radlib. Because I'll give you it, Billy Bob. You actually gave me the time of day to actually try and express yourself. I at least have to give you credit on that. But as far as that goes, yes, me and you have a huge disagreement on what socialism is, what Marxism is, and what communism is. It looks like. Uh, I How do I put this? I really think that Marxist Leninists, they um, they have an interesting perspective, but just like anarcho-capitalists, they just don't seem to understand how power works and how power consolidates. And I don't think that those who call themselves communists should be advocating for a centralized state, as Marx did not want that in any way, shape, or form. There's a reason why he didn't want it that way. And again, we have to look at all the atrocities and all the political suppressions of Marxist-Leninist systems because of the power consolidation. I think we should be striving for what Marx actually said. I think we should be striving for a system where the proletariat, where the workers actually control governing bodies of that society. And I think, tankies, although they may be good people in their own personal lives, they definitely pose a dangerous threat just as much as fascists do. So that's really where I am on that.
Yeah, no, and I think you're really good too at writing, your thoughts and putting forth, your disagreements with things. So what you just said,
Thank you.
I already understood from our correspondence over the past couple of weeks on Facebook. But yeah, it does beg the question. It does highlight some disagreements that we have, and and it gets us to maybe ground zero would be to first maybe discuss Marx a little bit, and to compare and contrast our different ideas about what Marxism is, and what Marx advocated for, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, yeah. So I mean, you're making the case that what Marxism is, what Marx advocated for, is entirely different from these actually existing socialist societies that that actually existed in history. So you want me to start with just talking about Marx, my understanding of Marx, and explaining how I think what Marx said is entirely compatible with actual existing socialism?
Yes, we can start off with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because you labeled yourself a communist, right? You specifically said that you are a communist, correct?
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, there's so many different competing frameworks and ways to process reality and to think about reality, and ideology, especially political ideology. So but no, I mean, I don't shy away from the communist label. I call myself a Marxist Leninist, and I call myself a communist, and I call myself a Marxist. And these are all compatible in my own framework. They're all compatible, and there's no contradiction there. But Marx was a philosopher for sure, and he understood the philosophers that came before him, namely Hegel, and he was engaging, with the prevailing understandings and the prevailing, ideologies of his time, and he definitely, was opposed to capitalism, and he saw capitalism as inherently exploitative, and he wanted improvement. He saw as the mechanics of capitalism, he saw a lot of room for criticism. He acknowledged that it was an improvement over feudalism, but he saw that it could definitely be improved upon, and there was a lot of aspects of communism, the exploitative aspect and the limitations of capitalism, in that it's anarchy essentially, and money, capital goes where the profit is, and that's an inherent limitation on what can be accomplished. And he understood that society would be better served with some sensible, more sensible approach to economy, and really the means of production. And so he had an issue with the means of production being privately owned and run for profit, right? And he thought, there's going to be a better way to manage society, to create society, than to run the things that society needs to exist, since they're necessary, we can't live without the means of production. So since they're necessary, why are we going to decide to run them in this manner where it's really, exploitative, it results in inequality, and really political instability due to, oppositional class interests and the class struggle that results from the private ownership of the means of production. So and essentially he understood that the class nature of capitalism will result in an oligarchy, essentially. So ownership, the capture of the government by the wealthy elite, and how they are going to resist. They're going to resist improvement if improvement to the system means that they will lose their position of wealth, power, and privilege. So he understood that the oligarchs, the bourgeoisie, are going to put in place mechanisms to keep people from being able to vote them out of power. And so while they may want to present themselves democratically and like they're a liberal democracy, in reality, the systems that they create are not a threat to themselves, and in fact only end up endorsing the system and maintaining the oligarchy. And then they also, of course, use propaganda and mass indoctrination and all the means that we people who are able to rationally observe reality can see. So in a sense, it's the oligarchy that leaves revolution is the only option. And so I think that's what Marx understood. He understood that revolution is the likely way that the masses are going to improve the system against the oppositional interests of the oligarchs. So he died before Lenin was able to accomplish the first successful revolution. But to say that he would have opposed that, I definitely would not agree with that. But I've been rambling. So maybe you have a little better understanding. I don't know if you learned anything, if you knew everything I just said, if you already understood that was my position. That
In fact, Billy Bob, there is nothing that you said that we do not disagree on. I mean, wholeheartedly. And which is why I don't understand. How could you know all of this only to want to continue classism and a dictatorship over the proletariat rather than the proletariat? Marx, like you said, Marx was a critic of capitalism. Capitalism is, an authoritarian structure to me because it allows for authority. It allows for a small group of people to have control over the rest of the as a whole. People in positions that they would normally accept had actual choices. And Marx, I call myself a Marxist per se. The guy got at least 80 things right. But even if we're talking about Marx, how do you claim to be communist if you believe that we should control the rest of society? When Marx said that it should be the actual proletariat in control of the governing bodies of said society, of said state.
Yeah,
the state should be withered away.
So, I think there are a little bit of audio difficulties. The audio is very poor from your end. I understood your question and I'm going to answer it. But yeah, we're just going to have to deal with the technical issues. So I'm not sure people listening or viewing were able to capture 100% of what you were saying. But definitely, no. So the criticism is important, and essentially, so that's great. We have agreement on my first statement, but then the confusion comes in because the actual existing socialism that came about, was not the kind of communism that Marx thought, could be possible after the capitalist system has been overcome. And yeah, I forget the very first thing you said. It was like, how could I support, a dictatorship if Marx, was opposed to dictatorship? And so that's an interesting question. I mean, and I would offer the several reasons, why, I take the views that I do. I mean, well, and number one is it's like, Marx, there's an end goal, right? An objective. And the objective is definitely to move to a better system that isn't dominated by, well, there's really two aspects, right? There's an economic aspect, the means of production that are privately owned and run for profit, but there's a political aspect, and the political aspect is very important. And so essentially, the class struggle is determined by the economic relationships. So the economic relationships is that, the means of production, the things society has to have to function, are being privately owned and run for profit. And that, that inherently divides society between owners and workers. And owners have different political and economic interests than the workers do. And not just different, but often oppositional. And so what the class struggle is, the class struggle is a struggle to control the government, is to control the political system. Because as long as the capitalists control the political system, they're going to run, the economic system in their benefit. And so what socialists say is, well, we need to, struggle to control the government. And once we control the government, we can run the economic system in a far more sensible and rational way that is going to be in the benefit for the workers, not just for the benefit of the billionaire ownership class. And so the class struggle is really a struggle to control the state apparatus. And here's the thing, like, and this is the main answer to your question. When there's a successful revolution like there was in Russia, you can't, you have to work towards an objective. Like, you can't sign a law and, think that you're going to sign into law the end stage communist utopia envisioned by Marx. I mean, to me, that's not serious. So, my question to you would be, you'd have to talk about specifically, what did the government do upon taking state power that you feel is un-Marxist or would not be compatible with, Marx philosophy and Marx work. And to me, that's where we're going to disagree, right? Because I see a lot of compatibility there, and I understand that socialism is a process. And just like the struggle, the capitalist struggle against feudalism took centuries before hereditary monarchy was mostly wiped out, and it was replaced by oligarchy, by the government of the ownership class, which again was a tremendous improvement. And Marx understands that capitalism was a tremendous improvement over feudalism. So too, the struggle for socialism is not going to be won after a single revolution. And of course, Marx agrees with that, and he said that. And also all the subsequent, leaders who I support and think were great, such as, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, etc. They understood that, this is a long, centuries long struggle to improve things, and you're struggling against the oppositional interests of the empire. Right. and the empire is the ownership class. And so it's those interests that are, the class struggle is not going to be won just because you win a particular revolution in a particular country. In fact, things might get even worse, in that country due to the forces that are against you and in opposition to you. But like in Russia, they had a choice. Hey, we won this revolution. We can move forward as best we can against these tremendous obstacles, or we can call it quits and resign ourselves and surrender. And so, they actually did that, right? The Soviet Union did call it quits after 1989, 1991, and so. I don't think that was a good thing. I don't think that was good for humanity. I don't think it was good for the people that lived in those regions. And I think, reality, of course, is proving me correct right now as we speak. But
yeah. I mean, Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't believe in utopia.
Your audio is
definitely
much better. Your audio is much better now, so that's great.
Oh, okay, good. So we don't believe in utopia. Me and you can agree on that wholeheartedly. There's no such thing as utopia. When we talk about revolution, as far as well, before I even get to this, how do you feel about the Black Army? Like, because communism is a moneyless, classless, and stateless society as defined by Marx, and his idea was to temporarily take over the state. The Black Army was able to do that within like 3 months. The CNT-FAI did it within 3 days. So when I hear Marxist Leninists say that it'll take 80 to like 500 years to abolish the state, I think those two examples pretty much disprove that. And I think Marx was wrong when he said that you need a temporary state. And even though he even said a temporary state, what Marx was talking about was a free association of workers, which would entail during and post-revolution that the workers themselves would create different groups and organizations. I don't know if he believed in confederation or federation, but the way the Black Army and the CNT-FAI did it was they confederated with each other. They used delegation, which created higher governing bodies and regional councils. And that is how they effectively created a moneyless, classless, and stateless society without the need for the state. And again, Marx was talking about a free association of workers. Now, if communism is a moneyless, classless, okay, now I get it now. You call yourself a communist because you believe that's the end goal. That's pretty much it, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, and I mean you can't write a law to put that into place. Like that has to be achieved, and to achieve the ability to do that, you can't have enemies. Because if you have enemies and you don't have a state, like guess what happens? You get attacked and overthrown. So again, to maintain, the revolution, you have a choice. We can continue as best we can, demand our sovereignty and struggle towards this end goal, or we can surrender and hand things back to the capitalists. Those are your two. That was this choice that Lenin and Stalin faced, and they chose not to surrender, and for that I'm thankful.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily need a state to fend off external forces. I think the Zapatistas figured that out because they still exist. Rojava isn't communist, but I mean they have elements of libertarian socialism that they use to coordinate with each other. They're doing pretty fine. What was the last thing you said too? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I'm thankful that Lenin didn't surrender to the communists. To the communists,
Okay.
to the capitalists.
No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So 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 again, like Marx did not want, because when Marxist Leninists talk about like a one party state and a vanguard, that all came from Lenin, not Marx. And
Right.
Lenin, as you know, he was uh, pretty authoritarian when he came into power. Like this guy had his own secret police and was like crushing anybody who spoke ill about the revolution. Like my biggest concern here is we're gonna have a situation where, which again, it looks like it happened in all ML societies. We're gonna have a situation where you're not you're getting rid of the capitalists, but at the same time, you're just basically replacing them with another ruling class, um, state capitalism. Because instead of just private individuals controlling every aspect of our lives, you essentially have a bureaucratic elite controlling everybody's lives. And these guys are the ones who are in control of the capital now, rather than on a private level. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how power works and power consolidation. What we have to understand is how power works, and power corrupts people. Um, and the reason why Leninism has never achieved communism is because of that. They see the type of power and privileges they get being in the ruling class, and they just don't want to give that power up. That's why at some point they were willing to do anything, which is including like killing mass murdering their people. So that's why I really feel like when you like can you show me a quote at all where Marx talks about a one party state or a vanguard by any chance?
Well, I mean, we do know, that Marx didn't really spend a lot of time, putting forth a blueprint. So I think what Marx really thought was going to happen, and a lot of people before Lenin thought was going to happen, was that there was going to be a revolution, and it was going to start in the most advanced and industrialized countries. So they really believed that there was going to be a worldwide revolution, and the proletariat was going to take power on a worldwide basis. That seems pretty clear that that was Marx's opinion of things, of future events. And what we know now is that the capitalists have they're very adept at offering bribes and concessions to keep their working classes from being revolutionary. So they found it's not hard if you give somebody a little bit, then they're to the point where they no longer have nothing to lose. They're not going to be revolutionary. It's those places where people are so impoverished, exploited, whatever, all those words, that they really truly have nothing to lose. And that's where you get the revolutionary societies. And so that's what we've seen throughout history, right? So Russia, they didn't have anything to lose. China didn't have anything to lose. Cuba, Vietnam. So these people were mercilessly exploited. The states were just corrupt as all hell, and they had nothing to lose. So they were, they weren't risking a lot in a to have a revolution. Now in the West, in Germany, where Marx really thought the revolution was going to be, the government, the capitalists, were able to provide their people enough, a combination of propaganda and concessions as far as quality of life, that these people aren't revolutionary. And the same is true, of course, in the United States. So that's just one of those things that you got to understand, that Marx was incorrect about. And I think later in life he understood this. But I don't want to pretend that I'm the most well-read person as far as Marx goes. But my general understanding is that he later in life he recognized that things weren't going to go quite how he imagined. And even and Trotsky too, right? So Trotsky was like, hey, the only way we can do this is to achieve this global revolution. And so we've got to push for this global revolution, and we can't, we can't just sit back and resign ourselves to our borders, because we'll never be able to achieve communism unless it's a global phenomenon. And so this is kind of the crux of the difference between socialism in one country, which Stalin tried to pursue, and which all ML societies are doing, and more orthodox Marxists who really are pushing for this. I don't want to call it utopia, but for this system that can only exist on a global basis. And that's what you need to understand is what you're describing can't exist in one country. It can only exist on a global basis. And so what is capable
proletariat struggle.
Yeah, so what is capable in one particular society is not going to be what we would all collectively be capable of in a global system without any kind of enemies. But in the meantime, those aren't the material conditions that exist, right? So the material conditions that existed in post-revolutionary Russia are totally different than the material conditions that would exist post winning a global revolution, after the proletariat has won a global revolution, and they no longer have enemies. Anyway, so these are important distinctions,
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm not saying that everybody's going to have the same structure, but if you're going to call yourself socialist, you have to look at the origins of socialism. And Marx is, I guess you would say, is the equivalent to the Adam Smith of the capitalists who don't understand Adam Smith, but that's a different topic, right? But as far as Marxism and socialism goes, it's workers' ownership, not state ownership. Those are two different things, right? We at least say that, correct?
Yeah. I would agree with that. That worker ownership and state ownership are two different things. But in the context of what I was just kind of explaining, again, so if we had a successful global revolution, at that point when the enemies are defeated, it kind of makes sense that we could work something that's more worker run, right? As opposed to having a central authority. But when your revolution is under threat, denying, achieving, achieving a successful revolution and then not, shoot, I can't think of these words. It's awful. But
oh no, I'm listening. I'm listening.
So when you're a central authority, thinking that you can dismantle this is what I'm trying to say. Dismantling your central authority, and still being able to defend yourself. Like these are oxymorons, right? And so you can't defend yourself with central authority is essential for self-defense. And that's kind of the problem that Russia ran into, was that they realized that if we're not going to just surrender and hand the governance back to the capitalists, back to the reactionaries, back to the fascists, if we're not going to do that, we have to defend what we're going to do, and we can't defend what we're going to do by just decreeing this utopian kind of really by pretending that we can decree this end stage utopic communism where the workers control the means of production and they get to decide whatever they want to do. That's because by doing that, it's just de facto surrender to the capitalists. And so I would argue that Lenin was smart and obviously thoughtful in not doing that, and he was correct in maintaining a central state and guiding the country towards self-defense and to really overcoming the problem. So it wasn't just towards self-defense though, right? So you have many objectives. You're a revolutionary government. You've just won a revolution. You come to power, and so what do you want to do? You want to improve those things for people. You want to improve the country because this was your motivation to begin with. Your motivation to begin with was to overcome the oligarchy, overcome the despotism, the exploitation, and the cruelty and the inequality of the previous ruling class. So you want to increase, what is available for the people to eat. You want to bring technology and put it, allow the people to access it. Education, healthcare, electricity, jobs. Like, this is basically what you want to do once you take power. Is your whole point in taking power in the first place. So, but in addition to that, you're being attacked because guess what? The people that you just threw out of power hate you for it, and they want to kill you. They want to destroy you. And guess what else? Everybody around the planet, all the capitalist powers, also want to destroy you because they're terrified that you're going to succeed and that you're going to set such a good example that the people in their own countries are going to do the same thing. So then you have yourself a situation where, you have to protect yourself from these, legitimate security concerns, and you need to work on your plan of improving things for people. So, and that's exactly the history of the socialist, of the Communist Party.
Yeah, like how Lenin killed off the whole Black Army, right? That kind of thing you're talking about.
So, okay, no, you did ask me about the Black Army, and no, I understand that there was an anarchist group called the Black Army, and that the Bolsheviks did not, accept them, right, as a ruling party. So, I mean, yeah, well, and that's the problem. Like, anarchism, to me, is not compatible with Marxism, and it's two different things because, again, you're never going to be able to maintain control of the government. You're never going to be able to maintain the advance towards socialism with anarchy, right? So anarchy is actually it's subversive, right? Because and this is what and I know I shared it with you in our chat, but this is what Engels was saying. Like, either the reactionaries are just mindless, engaging in mindless nonsense, or they know better and they're actively helping the reactionaries. Like, those are the only two choices. Because again, the what I'm explaining is that you can't just allow everybody to do their own thing once you win the revolution, because allowing everybody to do their own thing de facto is surrender. That's it. It's handing everything back to the capitalists, just like it was previous.
Right. So actually, anarchism is compatible with Marxism because we do believe in workers' ownership of the means of production. And even under Lenin, his state was not anything of what Marx talked about. Again, Marx believed in democracy, free association. And although I don't agree with Marx on the state, you can't say anarchism is not compatible with Marxism because we believe in democracy and we believe in workers' ownership. Now, again, the CNT-FAI, the Black Army, the Zapatistas, they're all proof that not only is it not utopia, it can't be utopia if it existed, right? Because that's not what a utopia is. Like, it did exist, so it's not a utopia. And as well as that, we've seen anarchist societies be crushed, but these are things we are able to learn from. Like, it's not because, oh wow, you don't have a central authority, therefore you're going to automatically be crushed. I mean, again, there are societies that still exist that don't have a central authority, but the reality of the situation is that anarchism is by definition socialism. Now, you could say you're a Leninist, right? You could say you believe in central authority and the vanguard party and the one party state. But we both agree that socialism does not equal state ownership. If you're going to be describing Marxism, it does mean workers' control of the means of production. Socialism and libertarianism, which basically mean the same thing to me, is they both originated in far left anarchism. I mean, the first person to call themselves a libertarian was a communist. I have to tell ANCAPs that all the time, but whatever on that one. But
So,
yeah,
well, there's a couple things you need to address. I mean,
okay,
because I'm making some claims, right? I'm saying that a decentralized anarchic state is de facto surrender to the forces of capital. I mean, that's my assertion. And so you're making a counterclaim that there's real life examples that proves that's not true. And so, I mean, I acknowledge that there's been some anarchist movements, but then you acknowledge that they've been crushed. And so, when we're talking about ideologies which have had the most impact on improving people's lives and progress, right? I don't think there's any real anarchy success stories, and the ones that do exist, I mean, pale, in extreme comparison to what the ML societies have been able to accomplish. So I'm talking about the Soviet Union, I'm talking about China, Vietnam, Cuba. Like these are actual existing societies that have done infinitely more than the few quote unquote societies that are quote unquote following somewhat of a anarchic ideology, the ideology of anarchy. But I would reject that. I don't think that that your examples that you can point to are any more pure as far as anarchy is concerned than the societies that I point to are pure, as socialism. So you attack my societies for not being purely socialist, and I would say that same argument can be used against your examples about anarchy. But the difference is my societies have accomplished infinitely more than the examples that you have.
right, because your examples existed in two societies that happen to have the biggest populations in the world. When these anarchist societies did exist, the existing ones like the Zapatistas, they implemented the same left-wing policy that these societies did. And on top of that, all the achievements in ML are through the blood of millions of innocent people. It's through a bureaucratic elite that successfully replaced the bourgeoisie with just a bureaucratic elite. Now, we both agreed earlier that socialism means workers' ownership, not state ownership. And again, there were things that there were things that the old uh, anarchist societies could have done. Like, for instance, like a lot of the people from the CNTFAI said that they most likely would have succeeded had they just stayed in the city and the communities rather than go out and fight Franco and the rest of the fascists that were trying to take them down. It's not necessarily that China and Russia succeeded because they had a central authority. It's mostly due to the fact that they had one of the largest populations in society. And I would even argue that China and the USSR was authoritarian like the US. And they basically have the same structure, except the government probably has more control over the corporations than the corporations having control over the government. So I understand what you're saying, but the reality is that these societies did achieve the same left-wing policy. They could have did things different that could have had them existing. They just didn't. It's not necessarily because they were decentralized and didn't have a central authority, because again, these other decentralized systems exist today. So, and again, the accomplishments of Marxist Leninism, or I should say Leninism, is through the bloodshed of millions of people, through political dissent. I mean, Stalin was a lunatic. The dude expanded the death penalty to 12-year-olds, for God's sakes. He genocided the Ukrainians. He anybody who disagreed with him was counter-revolutionary. Like, the guy was so paranoid, he would just wake up in sweats and just give all these orders to execute all these people. Same with Mao and Pol Pot. These are all examples of what I'm talking about. If you give a small group of people the control over the proletariat, rather than have the actual proletariat control these governing bodies, this is the result you're always going to get.
Well, I mean, what if, everything that you think is true is not true, right? I mean, what if, these people weren't anything at all like you described them? And so again, I mean, we're kind of skipping over. So I'm making some assertions, and you're not really addressing them, insofar as, and let me make a point about anarchy and the limitations of anarchy. So
okay, go ahead.
So my argument is my argument is that if you surrender to anarchy, you're ultimately going to allow the capitalist class to come back in power, and so you're going to admit defeat, and you're gonna say, okay, the revolution's done. So
you can keep saying that, but I gave you two examples.
Okay, no, well, I haven't conceded the point, so let's continue talking about it, because I haven't made any points about. So let's take the Soviet Union, right? So one of the things that they wanted to do upon taking power, and I've already explained what motivated the revolution to begin with, and then what their primary purpose was, and their primary drive after they won the revolution. So number one, they've got to secure themselves and defend themselves against counter revolution by the capitalist class, both the global capitalist class and the internal enemy. And then they've also got to go to work, benefiting people's lives, improving people's lives, because that was the whole point of the revolution in the first place. And so I think it's clear that they were tremendously successful in doing that. So, I mean, part of the problem in that area was famine. So famine was a regular occurrence. People didn't have enough to eat. Peasants had no political power. They were totally disenfranchised, and they had no rights. They had no access to education. They had no access to health care. So part of the program of the communist government was to provide these things, right? Was to defend the revolution, and also industrialize, give electricity to people, give people education, give people health care, give people more to eat, put an end to cyclical famines. And I mean, of course, they were able to do this. Now, what I'm saying is that anarchy wouldn't have done that, right? Anarchy is anarchy. There's no plan. It's every person for themselves. And so you can't argue that anarchy would have. Hold on. You can't argue that anarchy would have accomplished what the central government was able to accomplish. That's my point. That's my assertion, that there's no way anarchy would have been able to accomplish all those things that took planning. It took a central authority. It took implementing processes and working towards goals, industrialization, self-defense, increasing healthcare, increasing literacy, increasing education. You've got a plan. You can't just, hey, everybody do what you want to do. It takes planning, and it takes authority to implement those plans. That's just the reality of
right.
That's right. Reality.
Yeah, right, exactly. So anarchism does not mean everybody for themselves. Anarchism does not mean chaos. anarchism just simply means no rulers. Now,
Yeah.
if the Black Army
Yeah.
would have won in Russia, there is they would have implemented universal education, literacy programs, free food, um, self-defense programs, um, all this through local planning, through decentralized planning. Now, how and they would create coordinating bodies on a more regional level, even a national or confederal level if they wanted to, and they would discuss the bigger issues outside of their societies and their confederations. And the only difference is that instead of a big bureaucratic elite doing this at the expense of human rights, it would be the communities themselves. Everything would be constructed from the bottom up. So it's not necessarily, no, it's not at all that everybody for themselves. No, the whole point of anarchism is um, having universal freedom, human emancipation. It's not about this chaotic structure where everybody's out for themselves. I think you're thinking
But
about ANCAP.
no, that's fine. I mean, so they have freedom, right? So a particular factory can produce what they want to produce, and the central government can't tell them, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
Right.
exactly
Well,
what Marx was. That's exactly what
okay.
Marx had in mind.
Okay, but so let me just explain the problem with that.
Okay.
Because if that's the approach, and this is what I say, it's tantamount to surrender to the capitalists, to the fascists. Because had every factory been able to produce, pots instead of tanks, when the 3 million man fascist army from Hitler rolled in, they would have been destroyed. But Stalin had the foresight to understand that we have to build tanks. We have to defend ourselves because very soon he looked at the world and he knew what was going to happen, and he prepared for that. And he used authoritarian methods. He didn't allow the factories to produce whatever they wanted. He said, you guys need to produce tanks because we're going to come under attack. And so had everybody listened to you, that would have been defeated and they would all be speaking German. So this is
No.
just, that's the
Are you
problem.
assuming that anarchists would not make tanks, or they would not be able to know their threats and be able to organize on a much bigger level? Like, are you really saying that we wouldn't be able to have something in place
Why
where,
would why would Stalin need to use authority to make people produce tanks if they were going to produce tanks anyway?
well, if the Black Army, the actual socialists won the revolution, um, they wouldn't have had these quotas by killing people off. Instead of that, you would have delegates from each community. What do we have? What do we need? What do we have to produce for this war? And the factories that could
Well,
create the tanks, and the factories that could create the tanks, the military equipment, they would have they would still have their quotas. Well, I shouldn't even call them quotas, but because a quota to me sounds like forced in some way. We would have a plan where each community agrees they will create a certain amount of tanks, a certain amount of guns based on the actual local economy they have, and they would produce it that way. And all these militias would still be together. Like, you think we need a standing army or a centralized army? All you need is a democratic coordinating body of the military so that we can communicate with each other on a confederal level. So it's
yeah,
not like,
no, I get it. I get it. I mean, I just think that what you're describing is utopian, and I
but
don't
it
think
existed. You
the,
can't say that.
the idea that you don't need to centrally coordinate these things. I think
You
it's just
can centrally
I think that's
coordinate
a
them.
limitation with your own understanding.
You can't listen. You can do it. You can do it from the bottom up. I'm not saying like you can't have a central governing body. You can have one, but it has to be democratic. It has to be created from the bottom up. It can't be created by this one
Okay,
guy who's
well
taken
then I
autonomy over the
no
rest of society.
well you have a particular opinion. So what I'm suggesting that they did have a democratic system. It was based on the Soviet, right?
Wait, the
And
USSR was democratic? The
and I would
USSR was
reject.
democratic. I want to make sure I heard that right. You said the USSR was democratic, right?
Yeah, they had democratic centrality. I mean, that's what it was. They had a
No.
central body, and they had a politburo, and they had elected delegates. Of course, there was democratic aspects to it. It wasn't like democracy in the United States. It was more democratic than the democracy in the United States because the government actually cared about furthering the interests of the demos as opposed to furthering the interests of the billionaires. But I'm going to argue that of course it was a democratic system. Stalin wasn't some dictator. Like you are indoctrinated to believe through Western propaganda. He was answerable to an entire Politburo, and the Politburo supported him in all of his decisions. So it was absolutely democratic. That's the reality of how the system worked. And so again, I think what you're doing is you're just kind of regurgitating all these slanders that have been created by the capitalists because
They're not
they feel
slander.
threatened. No, they are. No, all the things that
No,
you
no,
say about
because all the
the
laws. No,
murders
listen,
and all
because
that stuff.
I knew you were going to do this. I knew you were going to do this. So what I did was,
Uh-oh. You broke up. You broke up. Okay, so we're about 56 minutes in, and I'm not sure where we're going to go from here. It's interesting. I just it's tough for me to embrace the worldview of anarchism because it's so obviously unsuccessful. And when we look at success, when we look at what can progress society, we see China. Thank God for China. We see the Soviet Union, the experiment of the Soviet Union before it decided to dismantle itself. And today we see what a bad decision that was for the Soviet Union to dismantle itself. But yeah, so I can't hear you. If you're trying to get your audio, I'll give you a few more minutes to try and get your audio back. But to think that we can point to the Zapatistas as a model for what we need to embrace. And I don't know a lot about the Zapatistas, but I know that they don't have any control over the Mexican government. I guess they're somewhat part of they have a geographic area. I could learn more, but it's nothing compared to what China has been able to accomplish. So yeah, no, if we're concerned with progress, if we're concerned with advancing humanity forward, okay.
I don't know why that happened.
Well, I'm glad you didn't rage quit, even though you were having to hear my my defense of these bloodthirsty tyrants. Yeah, no, it sounds like we're going to have some technical issues. Yeah, the issues started off kind of bad, then they got better, but now they're really bad.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
Yeah, that was good. So you were about to launch into I knew you were going to do this. And so you want to just let me know what you knew I was going to do? Yeah, and so that was a lot of our discussion. Our text discussion was just talking about the supposed atrocities that the communist leadership engaged in, and I was trying to provide an alternate perspective of the of the capitalist propaganda, the atrocity propaganda. And so
it's not. It's from the Russian and Soviet archives. Everything I said was from the Russian and Soviet archives. So you can't call it Western propaganda. That's not going to work for me. Not today. You can't. And the idea that Stalin was a Democrat or was democratic, he may have had some cabinet or some group, right? Where they would talk with him, but let's not pretend that they had any democratic say in what Stalin did. Stalin ordered the mass murdering and executions of millions of people. There was no democracy in the USSR. Can we just agree on that right now?
No. I mean, so
they needed so Stalin needed democratic approval from this group.
No, Stalin did get
there we go.
Yeah, Stalin tried to step down 4 times, and each time his resignation was denied. Stalin was interested in ending cyclical famine, which he did. I mean, within 10 years of becoming, the chairman, or whatever his title was. I don't know if he was titled the chairman. I forget his title. But, he ended perpetual famine. He collectivized, modernized, and industrialized the agricultural sector against the interests of the landlording elite who didn't want to give up their power and control of the agricultural system. So a lot of your attacks against Stalin and your accusations of genocide are unfounded because it's a warping of what actually Stalin was about. So he wasn't trying to murder people. He wasn't trying to genocide people. He was trying to feed people and put an end to cyclical famine. And of course, he did that. And so he was very successful. So all the things that the Soviet Union wanted to do after the revolution, namely defend themselves against counterattack and improve the lives of the people, he did that, very successfully. So he put it into the famine. He industrialized. He modernized. He increased education. He eradicated illiteracy. He increased caloric intake. He put somebody into space, and he defeated, 3 million, the largest invasion in the history of the known universe. He defeated, and he rolled the Red Army, all the way to Berlin. So, I mean, just a tremendous success. And, the idea that, well, the anarchists could have done that too. I mean, it's not convincing to me. I guess, you think that's true. That's fine. But to me, I don't think that's a serious. I don't think that's a serious position.
Well, and, because you have to tell you have to tell yourself that because you celebrate a mass murderer and a lunatic. But the reality is you haven't been able. You haven't been able. You haven't been able to disengage with the reality of the fact that anarchism has existed. It does exist, and I've given you. I think I've articulated very well that if the Black Army took over the USSR and not the Leninists, there's nothing that they wouldn't have done different, minus the executions and mass arrest, of course. But other than that, they would still be able to fight and create literacy programs and all these left-wing policies that we talk about without the expense of mass murder and genocide. Now, the law of Spaghetti that you did not acknowledge because it's one of the many orders that they have from Stalin's own archive, through the Russian archive, the Soviet archive. We already established that the Holodomor did happen. Millions of people did die, and Stalin was one of the, was the perpetuator of that. It didn't have to be done.
What didn't have to be done?
The Holodomor.
Well, what you want to make an argument? So
Well,
I mean, I could make a counter argument, but if you want to make an argument, I mean, you're just putting words out there and you're assuming that that there's agreement on what those words mean. But we have a disagreement.
Yeah,
There's two opposing perspectives.
I was just talking about all the many orders and executions that Stalin himself signed off on, and all in the Holodomor genocide that he created.
Yeah, no, and so again, if I thought that Stalin created a genocide, I wouldn't support Stalin, right? So if I thought that's what he did, I would hate him too. So I'm just saying that I don't think that's what happened. So we have a different.
So on our group, your only argument against the Holodomor was that he reduced the number of grain quotas, but I countered that by just simply telling you, yeah, but millions of people still died. So,
yeah.
And this is all from the Soviet archive, because again, I knew you were going to say Western propaganda. I was counting on it. So I particularly got all of the things that Stalin ever did from the Russian, Soviet, and Stalin archives.
Yeah, no, and I think that the Soviet archives are correct. It's my perspective that the Soviet archives vindicate all these baseless accusations against Stalin, and so I mean it's a conversation. It's a conversation we can have. But no, I don't claim that the Soviet archives are false. I embrace the Soviet archives. I think the Soviet archives support my understanding of things, and which again is the reality, right? I think there's an actual reality, and that reality is very defensible, and I do defend the historic reality and the decisions that Stalin made. I think were for the most part the correct decision. So we can argue that, but you're not going to win just by saying the archives prove Stalin's a genocider, because I think my argument is that the archives prove the opposite, So do you understand that there was cyclical famine in the Soviet Union, and it was the obligation of the revolutionary government to fix this problem of famine and to upgrade, modernize, and industrialize the agricultural sector. Like that was one of their top priorities, and especially after the grain crisis of 1927, it became, particularly, necessary to do that. And it seems like your audio has gone out on us again. But so yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, but it was this necessity to upgrade and modernize the agricultural sector, and it was resisted. It was resisted by the wealthy landowning elite who, before that time, had monopolized the agricultural sector and actually benefited from famine. So, so when I say benefited from famine, I mean, they produced the commodity known as food. And when there was a scarcity of that commodity, they became rich because, number one, they wouldn't starve because they had all the food they wanted. And number two, they could sell it for a much bigger profit. And so this was the problem with the agricultural sector that was inherited by Stalin. And so he did his best to upgrade and modernize it, but guess who resisted violently those efforts? It was, these people, the wealthy landowners resisted the modernization effort, and they,
the
essentially,
kulaks, right?
Yeah,
the kulaks, right? Yeah. So you're telling
that's my
me
narrative.
that
I mean, can you, and if what I'm saying is true, it doesn't really make Stalin such a bad guy, right? It makes him kind of motivated.
Stalin was worse than Hitler, but
no, but hey, if what I'm saying is true, right?
The kulaks, the kulaks aren't the only one he killed, though. the law of
hey, well,
Piketty's was
we can only talk about one thing at a time. So let's
yeah
focus on this one thing. And I'm
okay,
asking
but
you if what I'm saying is correct.
right okay
It kind of
okay.
makes Stalin look not so bad, at least in respect to this issue, right?
You're
If
gonna
he was,
have you're gonna have to repeat yourself because I thought you knew that I got kicked out of the stream again. You assured me I would be able to go through different tabs while we did this, but every time I go to my notes, it kicks me out. So
oh, I'm
uh
sorry.
yeah. So
I don't know why that is. So I have like two websites open, and I can go to like my Facebook page and without any kind of difficulty. So maybe I can't explain it. We can definitely try a different format next time if you prefer. But no, it sucks that you're having technical issues. Believe me. And I wish we weren't having these technical issues because it would make the communication better. But
yeah. So you
so
you were
I mean,
talking about the kulaks, right?
yeah, and I'm explaining that from the perspective of a responsible revolutionary government that sincerely cares about progress and improving society, one of your top things that you're going to fix is a backwards agricultural system that has constant famines and that is monopolized and controlled by a small group of wealthy landowners who get fat off famine, who every time there's a famine, it's good for their bottom line because it raises the price of their commodities.
The
So
kulaks, right?
the kulaks, that's correct. So do you understand that in a famine, when there's scarcity, if all the food is created by private owners, that they're not going to starve themselves if there's a famine because they have all the food, but they do get more wealthy when there's a famine because it raises the price of the commodities. And so this was the backwards system that Stalin understood needed to be improved upon. And so that's exactly what he did. And so unfortunately, it was these rich landowning elites who did not want to see their own nice position of controlling the agricultural system in their interests to be taken away from them. And so they resisted. They violently resisted the modernization and industrialization efforts that Stalin carried out. And what that ended up doing was compounding an already bad famine that was being caused by natural environmental factors, right? So drought and kind of fungus. So there was environmental factors that led to the poor harvests, and the kulaks took that same time to violently resist the collectivization efforts. And that just compounded the worst famine. But I don't blame Stalin for the famine. Stalin was totally right to upgrade and modernize. And in fact, that's what he did, right? So after 1933, there was never again a famine in that geographic area. And so it was totally successful. So Stalin ought to get credit for ending famine, for upgrading, modernizing the agricultural system. And that's exactly what he did. So that's not an attack against Stalin. That's again, more reason to support him. So thank you for that, Stalin.
That's wild. So one,
it's obvious.
No, it's history revisionism.
Okay.
So? First off, it had nothing to do with the drought. You guys say that all the time. It had nothing to do with a drought. Even if there was a drought, right? Like we have the quotas from Stalin. We have the orders from Stalin. The kulaks were not the only ones who were affected by this. You have eyewitness testimony of Ukrainians telling you, yeah, the Red Army came into my house and shot my brother because he took some grain that was considered state property now. No, like the law of Piketty's, one of the things was taking grain was punishable by death. You weren't allowed to leave Ukraine.
Why do you think that was?
Because Stalin was a genocidal maniac who believed that the Ukrainians were a threat. And and this is from the Soviet archive, man. Like
Well,
you
well,
can't
no, no. So,
you can't say this isn't true because it's from the archive
no.
itself. We got
Okay, so
eyewitness testimony, bro. You
yeah.
can't say this.
So okay, so here's the problem. So you know you have a spin on the facts. So again, I've already acknowledged that I agree with the archives. So I'm not gonna claim that what the archives say is not true. So I think the archives are on my side. I think the archives vindicate.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is, you know, there's a spin. So you have a certain spin. Your spin, you claim that the archives point to the logical conclusion that Stalin was a genocidal maniac, right? That's your understanding of that's how you interpret the archives. I interpret the archives totally differently. And I say, hey, it makes a lot of sense what Stalin did. And in fact, you know, Stalin did what he had to do to end the famine, right? And he did what he had to do to maintain the government and to maintain a semblance of society. So
After millions of people died from orders he signed off on, orders he created.
Millions of people died from a famine that had environmental causes. Okay.
No, because of the grain export that Stalin ordered for the Ukrainians, which he had no right to do because he did not own Ukraine. They had their own autonomy. He had no ethical or justifiable right to go into their country and say, you will be giving me all this grain. So no.
Well, it was all part of the Soviet Union, right? And so if you have a plan,
with the Ukrainians having their own autonomy.
Okay, well, you gotta hear me out, because I mean, you got to hear the other side. So I understand that you have certainty in your own perspective, but what I don't think you appreciate or haven't even thought about is an alternative view. So we're talking about
brother. I have. Believe me on that. I have.
Okay, well, for the benefit of the viewers, let me go ahead and provide that alternative view. So again, it was the USSR. It was a confederation of states, but they were all under the central leadership, right? So there was a plan. You know, they were doing these 5-year economic plans. Again, what were these plans about? These plans were about industrialization, modernization, about upgrading and offering access to education, healthcare, electricity. Like, this is what the Soviet Union was about. And they were also about increasing the the number of proletariat. So people were going to the cities, they were working in factories to be able to grow and develop the productive forces of society. So this is what the Soviet Union was about. In order to accomplish all that, in order to sustain all that, these people had to be fed. And so it's like in California, 50% of the fruits and vegetables of the United States are grown in California. So California is like the breadbasket of the United States. In a similar way, a lot of the agricultural supplies were grown in Ukraine. So Ukraine was the breadbasket. And so if there was a famine, again, there was like a famine in 1927. And that's when the kulaks, had their old backwards system in place. And there was a lot of hunger and hardship. And some of the cities weren't able to eat because of this famine. And that's when Stalin realized, hey, we've really got to get going on this upgrading and modernization of the backwards agricultural sector. So of course they did that. But there was a very bad famine that didn't just cover Ukraine. It covered all kinds of other areas as well. So the idea that Stalin, initiated a famine to destroy Ukrainians because he saw them as a threat, I mean, that is literal Nazi propaganda. That is ultra-nationalist Ukraine propaganda. The ultra-nationalists that sided with Hitler when he invaded the Soviet Union. I mean, that's just a fact.
Didn't Stalin have an alliance with Hitler? Like, Marxist Leninists are the fascists, okay? Because you guys revise history.
Can we focus on one? We got to focus on one thing at a time.
So
we don't need.
everything you said about the Holodomor was just falsely wrong. Nobody agrees with the history revision of tankies and the idea that Stalin helped with the famine. No, he caused the famine because of his
How
quotas.
did he cause the
The,
famine?
I just told you, you just can't counter what I said. He had a grain support. I mean, he had a grain quota from the Ukrainians. The law of spaghettis was part of that quota, and part of the laws that ended up starving a lot of people to death or getting them the mass executions that happened. You talk about it was going on other than Ukraine, sure, but in Ukraine, millions of people died. Well, that wasn't the case for all the other regions you were talking about. So this
No,
idea that it was
there was
let me
again.
talk.
Yes,
Let me talk. No. Stop. So the idea that the idea that it was man-made is completely false. No, everybody from the UN to other world organizations to the Ukrainians themselves, on top of the Soviet archives that agree with me, they all say Joseph Stalin was the reason why the Holodomor happened. It wasn't a famine. I mean, it wasn't it wasn't the weather. It wasn't a drought. It wasn't anything that you guys are saying it is. It was because of Stalin.
I mean, you
So,
can say that, and you can believe
can I
that
say one
that's
more thing?
true, but it's just not true.
Okay,
Even
okay. So
Robert Conquest.
everybody
So
in the world minus tankies are right on this. Okay,
no,
okay. Well,
no,
we'll just move on. We'll just move on. I just want to make
no.
sure. Let's
I'm going to make a point. So Robert
go ahead.
Conquest was the main propagandist during the Cold War, and he was the one
Nobody
to
can
advance this deliberate genocide trope, right? So Robert Conquest was the main propagandizer of this lie that Stalin was the reason there was a famine. And I have a correspondence between Robert Conquest and Togger. I forget Togger's first name, but they had a correspondence after we had access to the archives, and Conquest was forced to admit, okay, you're right. It wasn't a man-made famine. It was a famine that, so what he's agreed to, so this intentionality of the famine, that is what nobody does believe in anymore. And so, I mean, I'm sorry to break this to you. It's just a fact. Nobody buys the intentionality argument anymore. I'm telling you, that's just the reality. And you can go to Wikipedia and you can read all the people that talk about the Holodomor, and they want to blame Stalin. They say he mismanaged it, but they don't say he caused it. The intentionality part is nobody believes that anymore. That's just a fact. And even Robert Conquest has conceded that it was not an intentional famine. So those are the actual facts.
Listen, just because one guy said that,
one. It's everyone.
No, it's not. It's just you guys. It's just you guys. It's not everybody.
No, it's anti-communist scholars that have had access to the archives. It's anti-communists agree that the famine was not intentional. Of course, they attacked.
The Ukrainians agree. The Ukrainians agree. The UN agrees. Everybody agrees except you guys. That's the fact. You keep bringing up this. You keep bringing up Robert Conquest. Okay, nobody cares about Robert Conquest. Okay, and I don't know much about it, but I can guarantee that there's some context missing to that. Because if this was the case, why does everybody say tankies are wrong?
Okay, I mean, it's interesting debate tactics.
Yeah. The general world consensus saying you're wrong is a really great debate tactic. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm okay with that.
Okay, good. So I'm glad.
Okay, let's talk about. Let me offer a reason why this, the law that you talked about. So yes, there was at the height of the famine, there was some very harsh measures implemented, and it was for good reason, right? Because what do you need to do? So number one, here's what happened. You had a huge drought, you had a really big famine,
for good reason,
and it was awful. And so what you needed to do
The
is
Vanguard right here, guys.
can I talk? So
Go ahead.
what the Soviet Union needed to do once they realized they were in the midst of a very bad famine was to ensure that people are able to go to work planting and so they can grow food so the famine comes to an end. So that is the reason why you have this law that says we don't want you to leave. You need to stay where you are and you need to plant some food so we can get out of this famine. And we don't want you to hoard the grain. We need to be able to take the grain and give it to the people that are starving, and you can't just hoard it and try and sell it for a profit, right? So there was laws against
people were starving, my dude. What are you talking about?
no, exactly. People were starving. And here's the thing, even though people were starving, they still did work the land. And guess what? Stalin sent them food and seed so that they could plant a harvest in the midst of a famine. And guess what? 1934's harvest was very, very good. It's amazing. And so guess what? Once the weather cleared up and the system was modernized and upgraded, it worked great. And guess what else? Most of the Ukrainians, the peasants, they liked collectivization because it was better for them than the previous system. And they're the ones that grew the crops and planted and worked in the midst of a famine to end the famine. So it was just a tremendous success all the way around. The famines were forever ended. No more famines in that country. The modernization, industrialization efforts that Stalin succeeded in implementing forever eradicated perpetual famine and the susceptibility that system had to famine and inclement weather. Bad weather was always causing, shortages. And so once they upgraded and modernized their system, that put an end to all the food shortages. So again, I mean, Stalin just gets tremendous credit. And it's unfortunate that there was such a bad famine. It's unfortunate that people died. And it's unfortunate that harsh measures like, hey, you can't leave. You need to stay where you are and plant and harvest. That's the only way we're going to end this famine. And so that's what they did. And I mean, it's a tough situation, but ultimately it was handled in the best way possible. And we know the results. The results were success because there was no more famine, and it ended the next year. The harvest was bountiful once again, thanks to these processes implemented by Stalin.
It's funny because again, when we were talking on the group page, your only argument was that, oh well, he reduced the quota. That was literally your only argument, and I easily smacked that out of the way by telling you, yeah, but millions of people still died.
Yeah, no, millions of people died. There's no debate about that. Once Stalin recognized what was going on, he reduced the quotas, he sent food aid, he sent seeds, and they tried to manage it as best they could. I mean, I give him a lot of slack. Like, it's not easy to do what they did. And, it was in a very difficult situation, but ultimately they succeeded. He had no desire to cause a famine or to kill millions of people. That's not what Stalin was trying to do. He was trying to benefit people's lives. And guess what? The majority of Ukrainians supported the collectivization efforts. That's obvious. If they didn't, they wouldn't have been planting their food and they wouldn't have had a harvest in 1934 that was tremendous. This is just the basic reality. So, I mean, in my opinion, you are just embracing, with your entire mind, these nonsensical anti-communist lies. And, you would prefer to not really know what was going on, but assume it's true that Stalin was just a genocidal psychopath. Like, that's just easier for you to believe than to actually look at the facts, understand the situation, understand the very difficult, issues that Stalin had to manage and negotiate, and understand that, why those laws were necessary to keep people from leaving, right? Again, it's like if there's a drought, like everybody leaves California and California supplies 50% of the fruits, 50% of the vegetables of the North American continent. And, millions of people are dying due to a famine. I'll fucking bet you any government that cares about the people is going to say, hold on, California, you need to work. You need to grow your way out of this famine. Let me give you some aid. Let me give you some seed. Let me give you some shoot. Are you still? I'm sorry. There's technical issues. I don't know how much of my ranting you even hear.
I've I've heard quite enough. But I again I every time I go to my notes, the thing closes.
Oh.
So
No, I'm sorry.
so it's fine. So I need to showcase why tankies are authoritarians, why they're totalitarians, because you said Piketty's was necessary. The millions of people who were arrested, executed by the Red Army. You're telling me that in logs, you're telling me that was necessary, right?
Well, I mean, you're going to have to, you're going to have to be specific about what I'm defending. So you're asking me to defend something.
The law
Could you
of Piketty.
Right. Well, no, I explained that. I explained that, in the midst of a famine, you can't have people hoarding grain. Like, that's going to be, you've got to,
From the grain quotas, which you already said on the group page. The only argument you had to the fact that he made those grain quotas was, oh, well, he reduced the number of quotas, so it's okay.
right.
That was your only argument.
You understand that there's industrial cities that have no means to produce food. So Stalin had to manage.
California. You keep bringing up California. California didn't massacre their own people. California didn't make a quota that meant mass. Okay, so again, you're telling me you just said earlier the law of Piketty's was necessary. You're willing to die on that hill, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
all right. So
I'm asking you how. So Stalin should have just allowed all these cities who had no means of producing their own food. He should have allowed the cities to starve, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Ukraine was starving.
Ukraine was the bread.
Ukraine was starving because of his quotas.
Okay, but the quotas were to feed people in the cities. That's what I'm saying. You have to manage a very difficult situation.
You did. He did not have to starve, execute, and arrest millions of people to ensure everybody had food. All he needed was good government planning, which, yeah, you could do that under central planning to an extent. To an extent.
I'm arguing that Stalin did use good government planning, that Stalin didn't starve anybody. He didn't murder anybody. Stalin had a plan to deal with the famine, and it involved reducing the quotas in Ukraine. But again, the quotas were in order to feed the cities. The cities had no means of subsistence. The cities couldn't grow their own food.
You can keep saying he didn't create the famine. He did. Yeah. He did, though.
He ate all the grain himself?
Everybody except tankies believe that Stalin created the famine.
How did Stalin create the famine? By what mechanism did Stalin create the
famine? Listen. I need. We're talking about general world consensus, including from the country itself, saying that Stalin is responsible for the Holodomor. The law of Piketty's.
What did he do?
The law of Piketty's from the Soviet archive, bro. Millions of people arrested, executed, sent to the gulags. Everybody agreed. It's okay. It is true. It is. You've given us zero. You've given us zero. You've given us zero on the contrary.
We actually know, thanks to the archives, we actually know how many people were arrested for trying to leave Ukraine, right? We know how many people were arrested for hoarding grain. Like, I mean, all this information, we have really reliable and accurate numbers.
Hoarding grain. And you mean stealing grain because you're on the verge of starving to death. And when you get caught, the Red Army, from eyewitness testimony, they're telling us that they saw the Red Army go into people's houses, take the people who were starving, who stole the grain, because psychology tells us people are going to do that when they're starving to death. None of that matters to you, right? None of that whatsoever.
Well, you're just not dealing with the reality. You're not dealing with my
No,
argument.
I
You're
did.
creating your
I've
own. You're
destroyed your
creating.
argument. I've destroyed
Well,
your
no,
argument.
you're ignoring it. I'm explaining to you that there's a shortage of food, and you, as a central government, you have to decide who gets food and who doesn't. And so you do your best. But obviously, since Ukraine was the breadbasket, you have to do quotas, or the towns are going to starve as well. So
No, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't even make sense. You do realize
no,
that, right? Like
no.
absolutely zero sense.
Okay.
And like this is why I say tankies are just as dangerous as fascists, if not left-wing fascists, because you guys do this history revisionism that everybody else disagrees with you on, including non-Western propaganda, which you guys love to spam all the time. And then you just do these mental gymnastics and pretend like, again, what have you said? Your only argument here is that it was okay to kill millions of people because other people were starving. They did
Well,
not have to do that in
are
any
you?
way, shape, or
You're
form.
not responding to my argument, because I said no. I don't believe that Stalin killed millions of people.
We know you
Like,
don't. We
right.
know you don't. You
And
don't.
so stop telling me that's my argument, because it's not. My argument is that there was a terrible famine that the central government had to manage, and they did a pretty good job managing it. And that was they had to use some harsh measures to make sure that the famine came to an end. They didn't let people leave Ukraine. Yeah, harsh measures. They didn't let people hoard grain, and they didn't let people leave. They wanted people to be, on the ground planting for the next harvest, so that we could put an end to the famine. And that's exactly what happened. It was successful. They successfully managed the famine.
No,
It
they
came to an end. And a lot of the peasants did, through the midst of a famine, harvest a whole nother crop and then plant it, planted the crop, harvested it, and they worked their way out of the famine. And yes, a lot of people starved. It wasn't just Ukrainians that starved. It was people in Russia along the Volga River. There was a lot of people that starved, not just in Ukraine. But ultimately, there's everything that the government did. There was a justification and there was a motivation, and the motivation was never we want to kill people, and it was never we want to destroy Ukraine. Like that, these are preposterous absurdities. This is nonsense. But everything the government did was in an effort to end the famine and get out of the famine. But you had to do grain quotas, because that, again, it's like California. Ukraine was central to producing all the agricultural products. And so if the other areas, especially the big cities, are going to eat and survive a famine, you have to requisition grain from the breadbasket. I mean, there's no escaping that reality. So Stalin had tough choices to make. How much grain? And so we saw, as the famine got worse, his grain quotas reduced, and he would make the people in the cities were getting rationed. But it's not a perfect science. But to say that Stalin was doing it to intentionally kill people, or that Stalin caused the famine, these are both ridiculous and preposterous.
Intention to kill. I mean, we already discussed that. We don't. I mean, through his quotes, he made it pretty clear he saw the Ukrainians as a threat. But
all the Ukrainians,
that's all we have. We're never going to get a quote that says, "I, Joseph Stalin, did this to suppress the Ukrainians." We're never going to get that, because that's not how tyrants have ever worked. They're not gonna blatantly say that. They're gonna call people counter-revolutionary or reactionaries. But you ignore the world consensus on this, even from non-Western organizations. You ignore the Soviet archives and the law of Spicites. No, you don't ignore it. I'm sorry, I lied. You didn't ignore it. You justified it. You justified millions of people getting executed by the Red Army. You justified starving people to death.
There were millions of people getting executed by the Red Army. That's not in the archives.
We're talking about between the executions, mass arrests, and being sent to the gulags. The millions of people died because of the quota.
And because of the famine, because of lack of food. People die because of lack of food.
The famine, because of the quota of grain that Stalin created. Yes.
No, the quotas were to feed people in areas that didn't produce their own food. That's what quotas were for. I mean, can you address that? Can you just use your intellectual honesty and address that fact? How do you feed people that don't produce their own grain, except with quotas? Explain that. How do you feed 1 million people in a city that don't grow their own food without quotas?
He killed millions of. He killed.
No. Hey, you need to answer that question. How do you feed 1 million people in a city that can't produce their own food without quotas? Explain it.
Not by massacring millions of people in the other region.
Agreed. That's not what Stalin did. He did.
Yes, it is, and you haven't given us anything. You haven't given us anything on the contrary to that. You even acknowledge the quotas. You even acknowledge the quotas. You're telling me it was okay
to kill. The only way you can feed people.
The only way to feed people. Wait, and I love the absurd comparison to California. California is not killing millions of its own people in a specific region to feed other people. You keep making up this nonsense that Stalin had no choice. He did have a choice, but he did it because he saw the Ukrainians as a threat. Do you know the history between Ukraine and Russia? They've always had altercations. They've always had tensions because Russia, for some reason, has always thought they had more autonomy over Ukrainians than Ukrainians. Hence, what's going on right now.
So if you're going to, I'm telling you, a majority of the Ukrainian peasantry were in favor of collectivization because they ended up a lot better off than they were in the system that existed before collectivization.
After the Holodomor?
It was the Ukrainian peasants that were, again, in favor of collectivization. They wanted to end the old system, and they were the ones that, during the famine, grew the crops despite the hardship and ended the famine. It was the Ukrainian peasants that ended the famine, and it was thanks to a lot of the support from the central government, who sent them food, sent them seed, because the central government understood it was the Ukrainians had to be able to grow their crops. That's the only way the famine was going to end. And so they lowered the quotas and they sent them aid, and those people were able to work through the famine and end the famine. So,
after millions of people died from Stalin's orders.
Millions of people died from starvation due to
a
famine.
From Stalin's orders. From Stalin's orders.
Okay, that's just not true. Like Stalin didn't order
that. You could say it's not true all you want, but you actually haven't proven that. You've just denied what happened. You denied world consensus. You said the law of Spaghettis was necessary, including millions of people being executed, arrested, or sent to the gulags, people starving to death, taking grain that they needed because they were starving, and then being executed for it, arrested for it.
There was a law.
So no, you didn't. You didn't. And then you made this horrible.
What is it? I don't want to mispronounce it, but the law that you reference actually existed under the old system that the kulaks run. And if a peasant was stealing grain from the owners, they could take him into the stable and beat him. So
what's it called? What's it called?
Speculates or something? Speculates? I don't know.
What was the actual law you're referring to that the kulaks supposedly had made?
That you can't, the peasants couldn't go and take grain out of the field if the field didn't belong to them.
What? Okay, so give me the exact name of the law.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on because we're wasting time.
Number one, you're mispronouncing it, and that was the PR
I'm not
spin.
Russian. Who cares?
Propaganda spin that came after it. So the actual law itself, I mean, I read it the other day. Like, I mean, I can find it for you if it's that important. But I'm just explaining that law had existed prior to the communists taking power, and it wasn't even implemented.
Show me the name of the law. No. I want the name of the law that the kulaks supposedly made. You give me the name of that law, please. I want the name.
The name of the law.
You don't have one because you're a history revisionist. Okay.
the name of the law that the private landowners said the peasants couldn't steal from? How
You,
about like you can't steal from my land, peasants? I mean, are you kidding me? You don't know what
you
it was
don't know.
like prior to
You just came up with that. You completely came up with that. And even if that was true,
it is
guess
true.
what?
It's
Guess
absolutely
what?
true.
No, it's not. But even if it was, that does not justify the law of spaghettis that Stalin did. It
So
does
you're
not
telling
justify
me,
it.
yeah, you're telling me that peasants had the right to go to a field that they didn't own and take the grain from it without any repercussions? That's what you're telling me?
I'm telling
There
you
was no
that
law against that?
I'm telling you that you're an authoritarian who justified
No, no.
millions of executions,
Now you're
millions between
changing the subject.
executions, mass arrests, and people being sent to the gulags. Millions of
No.
people dealt with these three things.
You would have the viewers believe that prior to the Soviet rule in Ukraine, that peasants could go to a field that they didn't own and take the grain.
You
That's
do
what you're
realize
at.
that. You do
You're saying
realize
that was
that.
totally legal. There was no law against the peasants going to the land owned by a rich landowner and taking the grain. That they
It's
could do that
called
with impunity.
okay. Well, first off,
That's how silly you are.
no. You're silly. The matter of the fact is, who the kulaks are have been disputed throughout throughout history. We don't know if they
You
were
know,
the peasants.
you know
We
how
don't know if
you
they
know
were
how
we don't know if they were the peasants. We don't know if
you,
they were the rich landowners.
you
But
don't know how it was defined, do you? You want me to tell you how it was defined?
no. My second thing, you're trying to justify what Stalin did by saying, "Oh, well, the kulaks did it. They didn't do it. They didn't do what Stalin did." One, kicking somebody off of your land, private property that I sure neither of us agree on private property, I hope. But private property, yeah, that's just how it works. But to try and say that Stalin is comparable to what these supposed kulaks did, you can't do that. And you know you can't do that because you can't give us the name of the law because you made it up. We proved
No.
we proved you are willing to lie in order to make an argument. That's what we proved.
So this is interesting. I just claimed that
No, this
peasants
is
were
sad.
not allowed to go to the fields of the owned by the wealthy landowners and take grain with impunity. I said that was illegal. There was a law against that. If they were caught doing that, they could be taken into the stable and whipped. And you're saying that that's not true. They were allowed to go to these
It wasn't true.
private.
I didn't say it wasn't true.
Well, you did. You called me a
No, I
liar. You said
didn't.
I made it up. You wanted me to actually name you the law. And I'm just saying that's a common law. It
They
was
were
a
not
government
execute.
step.
They did not execute and arrest people on the level that Stalin did. You're comparing private property, a law that you can't even name us, to what Stalin did on a mass level. You're saying you're doing whataboutism, is what you're doing.
Well, I'm explaining that during time of a famine, and if there's a scarcity of food and millions are dying, in order to deal with that famine, you have to have very harsh measures against people who would try and hoard grain and profit from it, right? So you outlaw that. You say you are not allowed to hoard grain and sell it to people in the time of a famine. You're not allowed to do that. And if you try to do that, we're going to have very harsh measures against you. It's actually very common sense. But let me explain to you what a kulak is and who defined what a kulak is. So in reality, right? In reality, you had the peasantry themselves were empowered under the collectivization efforts of the central government. And it was the peasants themselves that held councils, and they were the ones to determine who were the exploiting landowners and who was resisting the collectivization efforts. And it was the peasantry that defined who the kulak was, and it was actually the central government that had to tell the peasantry, okay, settle down. I don't think we need to kill these people. So it was the peasantry that was pushing for real extreme penalties for the kulaks. And it was actually emissaries from the central government that were like a moderating force on the peasantry. I mean, this is how it actually worked in reality. Now, I know you don't know anything about any of that, but I'm explaining to you how things worked on the ground. On the ground, the peasantry was empowered. They were all in favor of collectivization. They opposed the previous system that was owned by landlords. They knew how exploited and mistreated they were under the landlord system. And they were the ones responsible for turning in names of people who were violently resisting the collectivization efforts. They would turn these names into the government, and they would actually issue penalties. And the government would say, no, that's too harsh. That's too harsh.
No,
that's the fucking reality. But anyway, whatever.
It's really not. It's really not.
And if you just
look at what
read
you're
any
saying,
of the
Billy Bob. Billy Bob,
Napoleon's
Billy Bob, I need you to understand what you're saying. You're trying
Okay.
to actually say that the Ukrainians democratically decided that, oh yeah, Stalin should do this and genocide millions of their own people. And this also totally disregards the fact that the kulaks weren't the only ones affected by the famine that Stalin created.
Of course,
you do realize that, right?
They weren't. It was a famine. Everybody was affected. Russians were affected. Ukrainians were. Peasants were affected.
Not on the level of Ukrainians, because Stalin is the one who is the one. Is not intentional. You keep saying I'm saying it was intentional. I never said it was intentional. His laws, the law of Spaghetti, and all his other rulings is the reason why millions of people starved.
So yeah, no, I mean, it's nice of you to concede this. So you want to just make that point clear. Okay, hold on. No, it seemed to me that you were saying that Stalin intentionally caused the famine. So that seemed to be your obvious argument. But no, if you're gonna move from that, or at least say that I misunderstood you, that's fine. Just be clear. So to be clear, you are you do not claim that Stalin intentionally caused a famine.
I never claimed that. I never once claimed that.
Okay, no, that's good. So excellent. So we're in agreement that there was a famine. And what caused the famine? Why was there a famine? If it wasn't intentionally caused by Stalin, what caused it?
No, Stalin caused it. I can't tell you that it was intentional or not, because you don't know how tyranny works. You don't know how dictators work. They're not going to put a decree saying these people are counter-revolutionary, therefore we are going to genocide them by X, Y, and Z. That's how it has never worked. You're trying to pretend that's how it works. That's not how it works. So the only reason why I say it wasn't intentional, because we don't necessarily have a quote on that from him. But the reality is he did see Ukraine. But the reality is he did see Ukrainian as a threat to his political regime, and this was a political tactic for him to do this.
To do what? How did he cause the famine?
The grain quota, bro. The grain quota.
A grain quota doesn't cause a famine. A famine is caused by
taking resources from another country. It can create a famine, can it not?
Okay, so this is what you're saying. So there was the harvests of 1932 and 1933 weren't bad.
Why would I say that?
Okay, no, I'm trying to understand here. So I mean, you have the USSR. You have a certain amount of food that needs to go around and feed everyone. Most of that food is grown in Ukraine, and I'm saying there was a famine that was caused by bad weather that resulted in Ukraine not growing nearly enough food. That's why there was a famine, because Ukraine wasn't able to grow nearly enough food. Now, Stalin had to take some of that grain, which wasn't nearly enough, and he needed to take that grain, requisition it to feed the cities, because the cities had no means of growing their own food. So yes, nobody denies that there was requisitions and quotas, and we needed to take food from Ukraine, because that was where all the food was that was being built, the majority of food that was being grown for the entire country. So we understand that there was quotas, but you can't say that requisitioning grain from the breadbasket to feed a city that would otherwise starve caused the famine. No, the famine was caused by 2 consecutive very bad harvests that resulted from bad weather, right? That's what caused the famine. And Stalin had to deal with this famine. And I say he did it pretty good. Like, all things considered, it was a very severe famine. He did the best that he could. And yeah, millions of people died. That's true. But I don't blame Stalin for millions of people dying. I blame the system, number one, that was so susceptible to bad weather. And again, this wasn't the first famine. Like, there was a real bad shortage of grain in 1927. And again, that's what gave Stalin the impetus of upgrading and modernizing the system. So, I mean, it's just so obvious what actually happened. But efforts by, people that are susceptible to Western propaganda, want to ignore the situation within which the central government found itself.
Saying Western propaganda, and I don't know how many times I have to tell you none of this is from Western propaganda. All of this is from the Soviet archives, Russian archives, Stalin's archives. It wasn't weather. It wasn't
No, the
weather.
archives endorse what I'm saying. The archives prove what I'm saying is true. That the famine was caused by two bad harvests in 1934. The harvest.
Really? Okay, all right. We're gonna fact check this. Oh, great. Oh, wow.
What do you think we're going to fact check? I mean, I'd love to fact check a specific point. Look at, you want to fact check the harvests of 1932 and 33 and compare those to 1934? It's night and day. And I mean, you didn't know this? Like, you weren't aware that there was real bad harvests in 32 and 33? Like, I mean, that's incredible that you have such a strong opinion on
You're doing whataboutism again. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the.
I mean, this is just such basic stuff, right? Like, I mean, you ought to understand what actually happened, and if you're going to reference,
you don't because your whole opinion, your whole opinion goes against the general consensus of everybody else. It was not a drought. Famines are man-made. It has everything to do with the government structure.
Okay. So, but nobody really says that, right? So you say that's the consensus, but I mean, in reality, we know that's not the consensus. In reality, we know
Ukrainians said it, the UN said it, other countries said it, everybody else except you guys do not believe this is the fact. But the fact is, Stalin's quotas did create the famine. It had nothing to do with a drought, and it had nothing to do with anything you're saying.
So, okay, can we fact check? I mean, are you okay with fact checking? Because
what is the question I should ask so that you don't claim that I'm being
Well, no, there's a point of contention. So, I mean, you just said there was no drought and there was no environmental causes, and you're also further claiming that everybody knows that, and that everybody says I'm wrong. But I mean, the opposite, of course, is true, right? So we know that there was severe droughts and there was severe shortages due to severe bad weather. And we know that the harvests of 32 and 33 were significantly bad. And so those were the limited resources that Stalin had at his disposal to feed the entire Soviet Union. So, we understand there was requisitions and things of that nature, but the requisitions didn't cause the famine. The famine was caused by bad weather that resulted in very bad harvests. So this is just a point of fact that is easily fact checked by AI. If you would like to, you can look at, how many tons of grain was harvested in 32 and 33 and juxtapose that with how many tons of grain were harvested in 34. But are you back, sir?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
So the general consensus among historians is that the Holodomor from 1933 was a man-made famine caused by the Soviet policies, particularly Stalin's collectivization, requisitioning through environmental factors like drought may have played a minor role.
Yeah,
just a natural.
So when you get to be my age, you understand that just because somebody,
you don't want to hear the rest. You don't want to hear the rest because you know you're wrong.
Tell me.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I need you to hear this. This. Factors like drought may have played a minor role. While Stalinists claim it was just a natural disaster, overwhelming historical government to suppress Ukrainian nationalism enforce peasants collectivization. Now, let's see. Key points on the Holodomor. I have to keep going back and forth because then it'll kick me out again. Key points on the Holodomor. Brain requisition and exporting despite, which is exactly what I said. In 1932, at the peak of the famine, the USSR exported 1.7 million. Also, another thing that I said, targeting Ukraine specifically, unlike other famines, the saying in 1932, Stalin used a decree banning.
So yeah, no, it seems like every time you try to go to your source, the audio is cutting out, and so it sucks. I don't know why that is. Like, I don't have that problem. I can go to other.
It was fine until now. It was fine until now. Eyewitness and archival evidence.
Yeah. So your audio is very poor. But no, it's interesting. I mean, to me, it's interesting because, you know, I don't know, I don't know what your sources that you're reading from, but it's interesting that you think that it's appropriate to just pretend that whatever you're reading from is the authoritative. And what I'm saying, yeah, well, I mean, what I'm saying is, you know, it's debated, right? There's a debate, and in the West, they want to claim that it was collectivization because first of all, for a long time, they claimed that Stalin intentionally caused the famine. So intentionality was the primary attack of the Cold War. When the archives opened and it became obvious that wasn't true, then they changed to this current one that says it was the socialist government, it was mismanagement, it was collectivization that caused the famine. But that's also not true, because we know that collectivization continued. And there was collectivization in 1934, but that harvest was fine. So what's the difference? Why would collectivization in the 1932 cause the famine, and in 1934, 35, 36 cause a bountiful harvest? It's nonsense. So the problem was the weather. There was real bad weather conditions. You ever hear the Dust Bowl? It's very similar to the Great Dust Bowl that we had in the United States. So they had real severe weather that caused a very bad famine, and the Soviet government had to deal with it, and they did a pretty good job. They worked through the famine, and the collectivization didn't cause it, and the collectivization actually improved the agricultural system, and the collectivization actually ended cyclical famine. So I know what
after the Holodomor. You keep bringing up you're talking about this after the Holodomor. All of this you're talking about is after the Holodomor.
So the Holodomor is the famine of 1932 and 33, and it was caused by very bad harvests during those 2 years that were also due to very bad weather conditions, drought. So that's what the Holodomor.
Droughts. Okay, so where I was wrong was that droughts were around at the time, but it had nothing to do with it. If you allow me to keep reading.
No, you can keep reading.
Yeah. Historian Robert Conquest, who studied Soviet archives, estimated 5.
Yeah, no, it sucks that it seems that every time you go to your source, the audio cuts out. So
how convenient. How convenient, right?
No, it's
not. The USSR's own meteorological
You just started sourcing Conquest. So please, what did Conquest say? It's interesting because a second ago you didn't know who Conquest was, but now you're quoting him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading. I'm reading. I did know who Robert Conquest was because we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, USSR's own meteorological records show that the harvest in 1932 was poor.
Yeah. The third. Yeah. So
Lost 40% of its Kazakh population in starvation. So
okay.
it wasn't just bad weather.
Okay, so I didn't know, nobody could hear what you said, and I'm sorry. I'm not saying I'm not going to take responsibility for that, but there are some technical issues. So you were cutting off. You didn't. Nobody heard any point you were trying to make. You referenced Robert Conquest. You did concede that there was a poor harvest in 32. But I mean, do you want to try and make a summarize an argument, and I can respond to it?
Can you hear me? Or is there going to be more technical difficulty?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Good. The reality is, and unfortunately, we got to move on from this because I only have like 20 more minutes. So, I mean, I'll let your words say everything we need to know about tankies, that they're willing to say mass murder and execution and arrests were necessary for supposedly feeding other people, even though nobody had to starve to death. We have eyewitness testimony, and everybody minus tankies say that Stalin exacerbated the famine. So let's talk about
Well, I don't necessarily want to give you the last word. I mean, no, I would disagree with that. And I mean, you're telling me what my argument is, but that's not my argument. Like, I don't think Stalin engaged in mass murder. I think there was, you pointed at two laws, right? The law that outlawed people from hoarding grain, which I think was necessary, and the law that said you can't leave without permission, right? This is you guys need to stay and grow plants, grow agricultural crops so we can end this famine.
They tried to leave because they were starving to death. You can't justify that.
No, you can, and I just did because.
Well, yeah, you're a tanky.
The famine never ends if you leave and don't grow crops. So what
they weren't even allowed to eat their own food they were growing. They could be killed if they stole grain, despite them starving to death. No, how do you justify this?
I'm just telling you, in the midst of a famine, you have to outlaw hoarding. If people hoard food in the midst of a famine, you're not going to get through that famine, and more people are going to die. So you outlaw hoarding, and you try and make people get back to work and produce a harvest so that the famine ends. And that's exactly what happened. And we know that it was caused by bad weather, because once the weather got better, the harvest improved. And we know that it wasn't caused by collectivization, because collectivization went all the way for the next several decades, and there wasn't another single famine. So it was a tough. It was a bad famine. It was a real poor harvest, 2 consecutive poor harvests, and Stalin dealt with them as best he could, and millions of people died. But it wasn't Stalin's fault, and he didn't try and murder people. Everything that Stalin did was an intent to eradicate famine and make people's lives better. That's just the reality. And it wasn't.
You completely ignore the laws. Then you completely ignore the laws.
I'm explaining those laws were necessary. It's necessary to have a law against hoarding grain.
All right. Okay. So again, I will let that absurd justification. I will let that absurd justification speak for itself, because
I'll explain a little bit further. The kulaks were known for getting fat off of famine. They were known to perpetuate famine and make famines worse by hoarding grain, because when they hoarded the grain, the price of the grain went up. It was a more expensive commodity, and they could sell it. So
they didn't make the laws, Piketty's.
They had the exact same thing before the communists took power. Peasants were not allowed to go to their privately owned fields and steal their grain. That
It was
would have been
private property, dude. You're trying to compare
so I've
private
explained
property
why
to the
it was
laws for
necessary to
cities. Like, come
outlaw grain.
on, come
Like
on. You're telling me that millions of people were dying before the law of spaghettis? Is that really what you want to say?
yeah, no, there was cyclical famines. There was lots of famines in that geographical area repeatedly. And in 1927,
Millions of
there was
people
a
did
crisis.
not die in those regions. Only Ukraine specifically, where we're talking about the law of spaghettis, was in.
That's not true.
It is. So
No.
what other region had millions of people dying?
A lot of regions, the Volga area for one thing, and that's Russia. In Russia, Russians died, and I mean, I think Ukraine, anyway. No, it's just not true that the only place people died from that famine was in Ukraine. That's false, and that's not the only place there was a famine. I mean, it was a widespread famine over a large geographic area, and people died. In many regions, people died. But
well, if I asked you, and if I asked you all the laws within all these other areas, you're gonna tell me that it was also a drought as well. That's what you're gonna tell me.
Yeah, it was like an El Nino inclement weather event. It was very bad, and it lasted more than a year. It affected two annual harvests. But no, I'm surprised that you didn't know anything about that, and that you at first denied it. I mean, it's like
anything I said.
I want to point this out. Like, you have very strong opinions on a topic that you are just now reading about, and as you read it, you're reading it from a biased source, and then you're
not a biased source. I got you on all of these. I got you on all of this. Okay, I got you to even admit that mass starvation, arrests, and executions were justified. That says more than enough about you. Now let's go on. We have to go on. Okay, we have to. Okay. Because
where do you want to go?
Because okay. Now, I guess we can take the 15 minutes to prove you're not a socialist or a communist.
Sure.
Because we already agreed that state ownership does not equal workers' ownership. We already got rid of the idea that Stalin was a democratic leader. China. Do you think China is a proletariat of the state? Is a state proletariat? A state of the proletariat? I mean.
Yeah.
Okay. How, based on socialism that we agreed on earlier, how can you say that?
Well, remind me what socialism we agreed on earlier, because I don't remember that.
We agreed socialism equals workers' ownership, not state ownership.
No, I didn't agree to that.
You did. You did. No, you did. I know you did. Okay. Because I made it clear. That was one of my things. I wanted to make sure we both had the definition of socialism. Okay. And that we both agreed that it was workers' ownership, not state ownership. So yes, you did.
So that's the miscommunication. Then I apologize if
oh, now it's miscommunication. But we agree though, right? We agree. It's workers' ownership, not state. No. Oh, now we don't agree. Okay.
Right, we don't agree on that. I don't remember agreeing on that. Okay. I don't think. So the thing is, socialism is such a broad topic, right? So there, No, I'm telling you, this is my opinion, right? So I can have my opinion, and you can have your opinion. So if your opinion,
it's not an opinion. It's not an opinion. I'm telling you now, it's not an opinion.
So what? So in your mind,
you're a left-wing fascist, and we're gonna go over why you are. Okay. Oh. Marx never talked about state ownership. We already went over that, right? So China does not have the workers owning the means of production. It has this bureaucratic elite controlling the means of production. One of the key characteristics of fascism is state control of said private enterprises, which, again, China did not destroy the demodification of capitalism. In fact, it only increased capitalism, and is using imperialist means like capitalist countries, like going into South America or Africa to expand their corporations and give them predatory loans. that increased their GDP and their power and influence over that region. So already we know you already agreed it's workers' ownership that's socialism. So
Well,
so
so no,
China is not communist. China is not socialist, not by Marxist standards, not by socialist standards.
well, again, if I'm a Marxist Leninist, right? And
You're
so
not a Marxist.
how does Lenin define socialism?
Who cares what Lenin says?
Well, so I know. So Lenin's not a Marxist either, right? So Lenin didn't understand Marx. You
You,
understand Marx, and
where
Lenin doesn't.
okay, so again, where in Marxist writings does he talks about a one-party state or a vanguard? Because as far as I know, Lenin said Marx was wrong on that.
Well, so again, you asked me, is China a proletarian dictatorship? And I said yes. And we know that that language comes from Engels, or actually, it comes from a general that Engels was having correspondence with. If you go back to where that term originated.
I think Marx is the one who came up with the dictatorship of the proletariat. I guess it really doesn't matter because Marx and Engels were both communists.
But no, what I'm saying is that actually came from a third person. If I'm remembering correctly, it came from a U.S. general, I believe, who was in correspondence. But and then I think Engels picked up on it. But yeah, no. So I would argue that yeah, China is a proletarian dictatorship. I would argue that the people do control the means of production, and it is through their okay only that the capitalists are allowed to operate their businesses. And if the proletarian dictatorship decided that they wanted to abolish the capitalists, they could just do it, and they could literally snap their fingers and make it happen, because ultimately it's the people who are in control. But ultimately, in China right now and for the past several decades, they have benefited. The working class has benefited from allowing Western investment and private ownership. So, but if the point comes where that's no longer a benefit, ultimately they exist at the pleasure of the people. And if the people decide they need to go, they will go. And
Yeah,
land,
I
nobody
think
owns
so.
land in all the land in China is owned collectively by the state. And again, that's what Lenin explained, was socialism is essentially state ownership made to benefit all the people. That's
But it,
what socialism is. So
right, right.
you can define, if you say, hey, is socialism when the workers own the means of production? Yes, I would say that's state ownership. Is socialism when a communist government is in charge and nationalizes private industries? I would say yes, that's socialism too. And is that an end goal? Is that the end stage of socialism? Is that the end stage of communism? Is that the end stage of Marxism? No, there's a lot of progress that can be made. But number one, how do we progress without developing the productive forces? And how do we develop the productive forces without harnessing the existing reality, capital, Western capital, right? This is the most
They
obvious
benefit
way
off
to
of that.
develop the productive forces. And so this is something that the Chinese Communist Party has understood, and it's what they're implementing. And that's totally in line with a
But they're
proletarian.
not. But they're not. But they're not communist by definition or by Marxist standards. And you're saying that this. You're saying that China, the workers of China control the state of the state of China. That's ridiculous. The CCP is basically an oligarchy with Xi Jinping being president for life. So he's not even elected. He was handpicked by the oligarchy CCP. So it's not workers' control; it's bureaucratic elitist control. It's a dictatorship over the proletariat. The proletariat has no say in how the government is ran.
If they had say, what would they do different?
If they had a say,
Yeah.
if they had a say, if I mean, I don't really know because I'm not from China and I don't pretend to know what the Chinese people want. But they have been propagandized for decades, for like half a century. So it would just have to involve like re-educating the people. But the reality is it's not controlled by them.
Well,
Therefore, it's
you
not
know,
socialism.
so there's 100 million people, right? There's 100 million people that comprise the Communist Party of China.
100
And
million people.
yeah, it's the Communist Party of China has 100 million people in it, and they are, they are you know, the party that leads the country. They're the party that comprises the government, and so but they do that. They lead they lead the nation. They decide policy based on the best interest of the people, and they put the best interest of the people as the deciding factor in which policy do I pursue. So that is in direct opposition to how the West runs things. So I don't know
That's what
how you
Hitler
have.
said too.
Hold on, let me talk. I don't know how you have all the people in charge of running a government. I don't know how that happens. I know that
Yeah, because you're not a communist or a
party
socialist.
is the only rational way to run a government is through a political party. And the nature of
No,
that
it's not.
political party determines how the government is run. And in the West, we have political parties that are of, by, and for the oligarchs, and they run the country in the interest of the oligarchs. In China, you have a political party of, by, and for the people, and they run China in the interest of the people. So I don't know how it's even possible logistically to allow all the people to govern. I have yet to see that. I have yet to see that explained satisfactorily. But that's your big complaint, that it's run by a party, 100 million strong party, and it's not run by the people themselves. So that's just, to me,
it's not socialist
that's confusing, because I don't understand how the entirety of 1.4 billion people can be involved in running a government.
I can explain that. I can explain that to you.
I have a party in charge, and it is a party of, by, and for the people. And here's the thing: they have been so successful. They are the most successful political party in the history of the known universe in improving the lives of the majority of the working class masses. So we have seen wages triple every 10 years for 40 years in a row, right? We see overwhelming satisfaction from the people with their party. Why? Because they understand that the party is interested in furthering their interests. And we have seen their quality of life, their access to opportunity, their access to healthcare, transportation, jobs, income, just basic quality of life and living standards skyrocket in an unprecedented way, never seen on that scope or scale before. So this is, to me, the proof that their government is a proletarian dictatorship, and it's also proof of what socialism is capable of accomplishing. And that's why I say, thank God for China, because we don't have that in the West. In the West, we have oligarchy. And so China momentarily had the boot of the imperialists lifted from their neck in 1971. And what they've been able to accomplish since then is just incredible. And it's a great example of what other countries can do too, if the United States would just end their merciless economic attacks like they do against North Korea, like they do against Cuba. Any socialist government could have the success that China did. And so China's kind of, it's just, I'm so thankful for that success, because it is proof of everything that socialists, say.
But you're not a socialist. We just agreed that the workers don't control the CCP.
No, that's cool. I appreciate you letting me rant and listening to me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, but you're not a socialist by definition, though. We agree on that, right?
Well, by your definition, I'm not a socialist.
No. By Marxist standards and by socialist standards.
Okay, no, I think Marx talks about the proletarian dictatorship, and I say that China definitely, and China says that about themselves, right? It's not just me. So China and me, the Communist Party of China, 100 million people agree that China is a proletarian dictatorship. That's something that a majority of the world's communists agree on that. So you're in a very small minority.
No, I'm not, because
No, you're in a teeny tiny minority.
No, I'm not, because the origins of socialism isn't rooted in a one-party state. It's rooted in anarchism. And even Marx The only reason why people don't claim Marx as an anarchist is because he believed in a temporary state, which I agree with. But even by Marxist standards, you're not a socialist, because the dictatorship of the proletariat was supposed to be the proletariat dictating the state through a free association of workers. Marx obviously promotes democracy in his writings, something that the CCP is fundamentally against, because not only are they an oligarchy by definition and practice, they suppress their people, whether it's having government ran internet where they only give people information that the Chinese want, whether it's suppressing protests on the street. There's nothing socialist about them or democratic. So by Marxist standards and by the origins of socialism, you are wrong. The only person who said this was Lenin, not Marx or Engels. So you're not a Marxist or a socialist.
So you're saying that because there's censorship, that you're saying everybody should be able to say whatever they want, anywhere they want, anytime they want.
I'm saying political. I'm saying the propaganda. I'm saying the propaganda and the censorship of the CCP overwhelmingly is one of the reasons why the CCP can say, oh, well, they're a socialist country, but they're not by definition or practice, not by Marxist standards. So you're not a socialist or a Marxist.
Okay, no, I mean, I get you what your opinion is, and all I'm saying is that the majority of people who identify themselves as communists disagree with your opinion about
You're not a communist. You're not a communist. Every time you advocate for centralized statism, and you advocate for an oligarchy. How are you a communist?
Well, that's your opinion. I mean, if you want to ask me how am I a communist, I can explain it one more time. But I mean, we can agree to disagree. I have no problem with that.
I mean, we know you're not a communist because ML has never achieved communism ever. Okay, and you talk about the successes of China at the expense of millions of people dying, and at the expense of human rights, basic negative and positive rights, freedom of speech, the right to own a gun, the right to not be tortured by your government when you say something against them. So many things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and we're going to disagree about all those things. So I think, it's very, the Chinese Communist Party and the policies that they have implemented are entirely defensible, and they're entirely in line with a proletarian dictatorship that is
working
towards improvement. And I think censorship is absolutely necessary. I don't think it's very wise to think that anybody can say anything they want anytime they want. You always need, person, place, and time constraints. And also, it's not good for society to allow, just subversive lies just to run wild, especially when they're funded by, subversive elements that are interested in overthrowing the government and destroying that society. So, we're in a class struggle, right? We're in the midst of a class struggle, and the Western imperialists, are comprised of the global oligarchy, and they are interested in, destroying these societies that are pursuing socialism and that demand sovereignty. And so China is definitely under attack. And so they have to keep that in mind, and they have to defend themselves. And the information war is a real aspect of class struggle. And so, I mean, if, it just seems like all of this is missed on you when you denounce China for censorship. It's like, if again, so you want this ridiculous free speech thing where everybody can say whatever they want, anywhere they want, which just means that, money will be flooded in there to proliferate divisive rhetoric intending to destroy the society. And China says,
listen,
China says, no, we don't want that. And so we're gonna censor that and keep it from happening. So I say that's good. That's, of course, what any proletarian dictatorship would do. So I applaud the proletarian dictatorship of China for defending their own airways against propaganda intent on destroying their society.
Yeah, well, that's because the CCP needs to be destroyed. They're a totalitarian state. But as far as the idea that I believe in free speech anywhere and anywhere. No, I don't believe in that. I believe like if threats of violence should not be a thing. Um, you're saying that I agree that somebody has a right to tell somebody or threaten somebody that they're going to kill them? No, that's you only said that, not me. But my main thing with China is that they don't allow any speech that criticizes the Chinese government. Now you're pretending that it's because of capitalists invading their country or something like that. I don't know, something silly like that. But no,
So
that's just an excuse you need
since
to
2013, since 2013, they have had this anti-corruption campaign, and they are soliciting. They're soliciting criticism of the government. They're soliciting people to turn in corrupt officials. So they're not censoring criticism. They're asking for criticism. Also, we know they criticize their government. We've seen the protests when the lockdowns went a little too far. People took to the streets, and the government understood that, and so they ended those things. So this whole idea that you can't criticize or say anything against the government because they'll put you in jail. I mean, that's just it's really pathetic that you even think that. Like, you really should know better.
It's
But
not pathetic. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's a
I just
fact.
explained to you why it's not a fact. I just
What
explained
do
to you
you
how
think?
it's not a fact.
Yeah, and I'm about to tell you why you're wrong. How are you telling you're telling us that even the basic free speech of protesting your government on the street is justifiable because because of the enemy of the state? Okay, so then that means anybody who says anything bad about the Chinese government is an enemy of the state. So you don't believe in free speech. You just justify China dismantling protests.
So no, your logic escapes me. I don't believe in free speech. I
I
understand
told
that
you
speech
so.
ought to be regulated. I understand that speech is regulated. Every society on the planet regulates speech. I understand that. And China regulates speech in the interests of the proletariat, in the interests of their socialist society. So, and I approve that, and I applaud that, and I understand that's what any proletarian government is going to do.
But you
But
showed us it's a proletariat government. You have not shown that any way, shape, or form because the CCP is an oligarchy by definition.
no, we disagree on that. That's a disagreement. You can believe
Where
what
is
you
the
want.
democracy? Where is the democratic? Where's the democratic structure in the CCP? They hand select their officials. All the candidates that are candidates, they are hand selected and approved by the CCP. That's not democracy.
Yeah, so I mean, they have a very democratic system. It's far more democratic than Western systems.
That's a lie.
There's a
That's a lie.
national assembly that everybody as part of the national assembly gets voted on, and
Hand selected by the CCP. That's the thing you keep ignoring.
no, that's not true. So
It is true.
you have at the local level, you have votes to pick the local leaders, and then those local leaders all have vote to pick the regional leaders, and then those leaders all get to vote to pick national leaders. So it's a very democratic system,
No, it's not.
it's far more democratic than what we have in the West.
No, it's not. The U.S. is more socialist than China, and all of that is good and fancy until you realize that the CCP can basically say whatever, can override anything that these local councils are about, if you don't want to call them local councils. But no, the CCP has the final say on everything. The CCP hand selects candidates from the candidates for the CCP.
Do
So
you
it's
think
not.
the Chinese people are satisfied with their government?
I mean, are they satisfied with the government? I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think approval ratings are actually valid in a state that propagandizes their people and suppresses their speech? I mean, they kind of know what happens when you talk crap about the Chinese government. You they so no, I don't. If you're going to go for the approval ratings, no, there's so many reasons why that's wrong. Hitler had high approval ratings, so I don't know. I don't know what that means.
Okay, so like if you say in your own life, right, your wages were tripling every 10 years for 40 years, you wouldn't be satisfied with that?
What about the sweatshops in China or the any of the other occupations really?
Right. You work in a sweatshop, okay? You work in a sweatshop, and then every 10 years, your wages are tripling, and that happens for 40 years in a row. You're still going to be unsatisfied. You're going to be angry with your government.
The way, I mean, I don't know too much about the wages, so I can't even say anything about that.
I'm telling you. So, and here's the thing. So I do think polling can be, I mean, of course, polling can be skewed and polling can be corrupted and manipulated, but also polling can be accurate. And I think when you have professional Western polling organizations whose job it is to find out people's attitudes, and they go to China and they find out that 96% of the people who they anonymously poll are either satisfied or highly satisfied with the central government. And then when you compare that to the same exact polling done in the United States, where it's about 38% are satisfied or highly satisfied with the central government, I think there's a reason why you have such high ratings for approval ratings in China. And it has to do with the explosion in access to opportunity and in the explosion and skyrocketing of quality of life, access to material goods, access to education, access to healthcare, access to transportation. Like what China's government has done is literally unprecedented and impossible to overstate. Never before in the history of the known universe has any society accomplished what the Chinese Communist Party, Communist Party of China has been able to accomplish. Like it's unprecedented. And the people in China are thankful and they are satisfied with their government. That's just the facts. To me, I give credit to Marxism, and I've read Xi Jinping's Governance of China, and I understand how Marxism and socialism and Mao Zedong thought these are pillars of their approach to governance. And I give credit to Marxism for this success because they absolutely deserve it. It's unprecedented, and it shows you what is capable, what a government is capable of when they really care about the people and aren't just an oligarchy in disguise like you have in the West. So it's a huge difference.
They're an oligarchy. Wages came at the expense of political suppression and an oligarchy, which you have not refuted. But
no,
listen, I gotta go in this.
The proof of their political representation is in the metrics. The metrics are proof that the people are being represented because their lives are improving so fast. Their lives are improving so fast and steadily. That's proof that they're being represented in the government. Like, you don't understand how that makes sense, but it does. Like, that's the proof. If they weren't represented, their lives wouldn't be skyrocketing in improvement. You understand? It's simple.
The CCP is an oligarchy, so by definition, they are not being represented. You keep talking about these 96% approval ratings. I would love to see the actual that you're talking about, because I'm pretty sure they're not American organizations, let alone the organization that's not co-opted by the CCP. But unfortunately, I have to go. I have to say, like I told you about. Really good conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Good conversation, and I'm surprised that I have so many people watching and commenting on the side here. Thank you, commenters. I don't do this a lot. Normally, we have a podcast, and I'm just talking with people that I agree with. But it was fun to hear to go back and forth, and so I appreciate you being a good sport. I'm sorry for those technical difficulties. But yeah, I'll end it now, and then we'll pick up offline, Mr. Ali Mentalist. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you much, Bill.
All right. Bye.